but the end result being a total. I mean, they say my songs are long now, you know.
He's been called a prophet, a poet, a ghost who rewrote the rules of fame. Bob Dylan, for over 60 years, has been the mystery man of music, always moving, always watching, rarely revealing too much. But today, Dylan has surprised even his closest confidants. He's named them the 6 women of rock who shaped his soul. This isn't just a list, it's a map of influences, heartbreaks, obsessions, and quiet admiration. These are not casual favorites. These are women who carved their names into his memory and melodies. Some he knew, some he chased, some stayed with him longer than he'll ever admit. The first woman he mentioned, a force of fire and gravel, someone whose very presence once made him pause. That woman was Janis Joplin. He watched her explode onto the scene like a comet, burning, blazing, gone too soon. They met only a handful of times, but Dylan never forgot her. He admired her pain, her wildness, the way she screamed every lyric like it was her last prayer. He once said she sang as if she knew she didn't have much time, and that's what haunted him. Janis wasn't just a blues siren. She was a soul unraveling in front of the world, and Dylan, who rarely flinched, was shaken by how unafraid she was to bleed in public. But then came someone quieter, someone who never raised her voice but whose lyrics cut even deeper. That woman was Joni Mitchell. They clashed. Everyone knows it, but what few people realize is how much Dylan respected her. Joni was everything the industry didn't expect. Brilliant, cerebral, defiant. She challenged him, called him out, even mocked him once on stage. But beneath the ego wars and sharp tongues, Dylan kept her records close. He listened, studied. Joni made lyrics feel like literature. She made melody feel like a razor, and though he never said it out loud, her songwriting forced him to raise the bar. After Joni, he named someone unexpected. A rock queen, yes, but also a woman who made him smile when he didn't know he needed it. Her name, Stevie Nicks. He called her the Velvet Hurricane. They toured briefly in the late 70s. Late-night tour buses, cigarette smoke, whiskey-tinged laughter. Stevie was magic and myth, and Dylan was drawn to her contradictions. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She just was. Carrying cards, with pictures of Jack, of diamonds on them, an ace of spades on them, pictures of ER mules. And in her voice, he heard freedom, a kind of feminine chaos he couldn't bottle or define. She made music that floated, and yet somehow hit like thunder. And then he said a name that surprised everyone. A woman with country roots, but rock blood. That voice belonged to Linda Ronstadt. Dylan adored her phrasing, her clarity, her refusal to be anyone but herself. There was no showboating, no desperate reach for stardom. Only strength. Only elegance. They never worked together, but he watched from the shadows, like he always did. He once sat alone in the back row of a small theater, just to hear her sing Blue Bayou. Hidden beneath a hoodie, he let her voice wrap around him like smoke. He said it reminded him of why he started writing in the first place. There was something sacred in her delivery, an emotional precision that struck him deeper than 1,000 choruses. Linda didn't just sing songs, she inhabited them. She gave heartache a pulse, and nostalgia a backbone. To Dylan, she was both. A ghost and a guide. A woman who never tried to bend her voice to fit the times, and somehow always sounded timeless. It shook him a little, how much he felt while listening. It made him remember the purity he once chased with every verse. And just like that, his expression changed. Because not all the names came easy. One in particular brought a different look to his face. A mixture of pride, pain, and something unresolved. That was Patti Smith. They were friends, rivals, two silhouettes in the smoky underground of the New York scene, walking separate paths that somehow always led to the same door. Patti was the poet who danced on the line between punk and prayer. She was loud where he was silent. She burned where he smoldered. They didn't always agree. They didn't have to. Patti didn't idolize him. She interrogated him. She pushed him, challenged him, made him feel something other than legendary. And Dylan, who was used to reverence, found that both disarming and thrilling. There were moments between them, late-night conversations, letters never sent, nods, across dimly lit bars, when he thought she might be the only person who truly understood the weight of myth. Patty didn't want to become him, but she knew what it felt like to be watched, dissected, immortalized before her story was even half told. Dylan once said that Patty could write a line that made your spine ache. That she didn't sing, she dared. Each lyric a battle cry. Each performance a reckoning. He never tried to tame her because he knew he couldn't. And maybe, deep down, he didn't want to. Because Patti Smith wasn't just a peer. She was a mirror, one that didn't flatter, but revealed. And finally, the last name. One he saved for the end, not because she meant less, but because she may have meant the most. That woman was Emmylou Harris. Soft power, that's how Dylan described her. The woman who could melt a room without ever raising her voice. They crossed paths many times, sometimes sharing microphones beneath stage lights, other times drifting past each other in hotel hallways and green rooms that smelled of stale coffee, sweat, and fading dreams. Emmylou didn't speak loudly. She didn't need to. Dylan once said she could hush a crowd with nothing but a breath. There was grace in her, yes, but also gravity. She carried heartbreak like a hymn and turned sorrow into something holy. She never tried to impress him. That's exactly why she did. In an industry swollen with ego and spectacle, she walked softly, carrying songs that felt like prayers. Dylan, said Emmylou, understood silence better than most songwriters understood sound. Her restraint wasn't submission, it was rebellion, a refusal to shout, just to be heard. He admired her, not just as a singer, but as a kind of spiritual mirror, someone who reminded him that music didn't need to be loud to echo forever, and that stillness, in the right hands, could roar. To Dylan, Emmylou was proof that purity still had a place in rock and roll, and that the quietest voices often leave the deepest marks. These 6 women weren't just rock stars to Dylan. They were echoes, teachers, mirrors held up at angles no man could anticipate. Each one challenged him in a different way. Some with fire, some with silence, some with words that cut like scripture. He spent a lifetime being asked about meaning, about truth, about the invisible thread that pulls art into legend. And now, in naming these 6, Dylan isn't just giving credit. He's revealing something sacred, a hidden map of influences that shaped him not just as a writer, but as a man. In a world that always looked to him for answers, Dylan is now pointing us toward theirs, because maybe the real story isn't in what he said, but in what moved him to speak, not to worship, not to compare, but to listen differently. To hear the pain in Janice, the genius in Joni, the mystery in Stevie, the clarity in Linda, the revolution in Patty, and the reverent restraint in Emmylou. These voices didn't just inspire Dylan. They tempered him, shook him, made him question his own voice in ways only a muse or a mirror can. And maybe, just maybe, we should listen to them now. Not as background, but as prophecy. Because even legends, it turns out, have their gods. And he just named them. And as Dylan stepped back from the list, something unspoken lingered in the air. Not regret, not nostalgia exactly, but a kind of surrender. For a man who built his legend on riddles, this was the closest he had come to a confession. These names weren't thrown out casually. They were summoned. Each one is like a candle lit in a dark corridor of his memory. They weren't just women. He admired they were women who haunted him, who whispered into the spaces between his verses, who filled the quiet with something heavier than sound. For all the noise the world made about Dylan, these 6 women were the ones he listened to when he needed to feel small again, when he needed to be reminded that greatness is borrowed, never owned. And maybe that's what makes this moment so staggering. Bob Dylan, the myth, the enigma, the voice of generations, revealing that the core of his inspiration came not from competition, not from legacy building, but from reverence, from standing at the feet of women who made music, not to conquer, but to communicate. Who didn't chase fame? They chased feeling, and in doing so, they redefined what power could sound like. Janice taught him that fragility could be fierce, that howling into the void was sometimes the only way to survive it. Joni taught him that intelligence could be art, that a well-placed metaphor could bruise harder than a guitar solo. Stevie reminded him of magic, not the kind you perform, but the kind you are when you stop pretending. Linda showed him that beauty can stand still and still shake the earth. Patty made him uncomfortable, in the best way, like a wound healing, under pressure, and Emmylou made him remember that silence is not absence. Silence, when held by someone who means it, can be the loudest message of all. In a culture obsessed with idols, Dylan just showed us what it means to kneel, not in worship, but in wonder. These women didn't exist to orbit his sun. They had their own galaxies, their own gravity, and in some small, crucial way, they altered the tides of his music forever. And maybe this is the legacy he's finally ready to leave behind, not just the songs, not just the cryptic interviews, or the Nobel Prize, but this, a trail of voices he followed when he felt tired. A map of sirens who didn't just call him forward, but called him inward. Women who asked nothing of him, except that he listened, and we should too, because in naming them, Dylan wasn't just telling us who shaped him, he was reminding us who's worth remembering.